I cannot promise that you'll be any smarter after my presentation than you are now, but I can make 100% promise half an hour will have passed once I'm finished. We're talking about sustainability today. Just a couple of questions for the audience. What would you guess? How high is the percentage of plastic waste in our oceans? Any ideas? 25%, 50%, 75%? I'll answer for you. 75% of the waste in our oceans is plastic waste. Another question. So just roughly, do you know how much plastic waste is produced per capita in Germany per year? Figures for 2020? Just give me a number in kilograms. Think of the yellow bag where we collect plastic waste in Germany. 82 million people per capita. 76 kilos is quite a bit. And again, 38 kilograms of that are just packaging waste alone. So this really brings us to our topic of today, sustainability. I'm a representative of Albea, and I would like to introduce you to what we do as Albea. And against that background, I would like to introduce you to a tube which is representative of Albea's commitment for sustainable packaging. First of all, this is a picture of our CEO, François Lusquin, who transports these values. So we would like to protect beauty. And how do we do that? We want to achieve 100% sustainable packagings. And we've actually committed to do that. I will elaborate on that a little later. And this wouldn't work, of course, if our company would not apply any sustainable thinking and put that actually into practice. We can't do it alone. We have to work with our pre-suppliers, suppliers, our clients, our employees. Only if we work together, we can actually achieve sustainable product development. So how do we go about this? Of course, we've taken a certain path in order to achieve that. We actually signed a commitment with Ellen MacArthur Foundation in 2018. We're one of the first packaging manufacturers that actually signed the Ellen MacArthur Foundation commitment. Are you all familiar with Ellen MacArthur Foundation? No. Okay, so this is a charity organization based in Great Britain. And their aim is to stimulate circular economy. Ellen MacArthur Foundation also launched the Plastic Economy Initiative, which has more than 1,000 signatory organizations that actually will all collaborate to foster circular economy in the packaging industry. EcoVadis, are you all familiar with EcoVadis? No? EcoVadis is the largest sustainability rating company worldwide. So we received their Gold Award, which is really an excellent result because this makes us one of the top 3% of plastic products manufacturing companies worldwide. So these are just examples of what we've done. There are way more organizations that we're a member of. We're also a member of CDP, of the Carbon Disclosure Project. Are you familiar with that? It's a nonprofit organization, and their aim is to have all companies publish their environmental data. We received a B rating as compared to C ratings, which most companies in our industry are able to achieve. So we've already started to move towards sustainability, and we really want to get rated. We want to get rated in what we do and want to have our strategy rated too. So strategy, this all needs to be backed up by strategy if we want to produce sustainable packaging, of course. So what's primarily important for us is that our packaging is safe for our customers, safe for ourselves. So we have to closely review our supply chains from the raw material up to the finished product. And we run different tools in order to review all those processes. Next, our products should have as low an impact on our environment as possible. And we would like to have an impact on resource consumption in that regard. So we've been running life cycle assessments for many years now. So we review our products and our processes. Our life cycle assessment is performed about 100 times every year. So we assess each and every product of our company, and we produce valid data on the impact of our packaging on the environment. It's traceable, it's easy to understand, and we also publish that data. And our commitment is, let me come back to Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we want to make our packaging circular. We want to make it a part of a circular economy. And together with many other companies, we've signed a commitment. By 2025, our packaging should either be recyclable, reusable, or, among others, compostable, and 10% needs to be produced from recycled materials, which is not as easy as it may sound. With tubes, it's actually a little easier than in other product areas where we sometimes really meet our limits of what we can do industrially, but I wouldn't want to focus on that today. So how do we go about that? I think most of you know that. Anyone familiar with that? Have you ever seen that pyramid? Maybe you could raise your hand if you have. At least some, but some don't. So our strategy is like a priority list, meaning our top priority when we produce packaging materials is reduction of materials. Reduce, reduce, reduce. Use as little material as possible in the first place without actually impairing the functionality or the safety of our product. The second pillar is reuse. Reuse is way more important in another product area that we're active in, CRP. That's more important there because we use refillable lipsticks, things like that. When we're talking tubes, that's not possible. I can tell you that right from the get-go, it's not possible. So our next step is let's check our products. Can it be recycled and how? Has it been designed for recycled? How can I design my product in a way so as to make it suitable for the recycling process as such? So the next step is PCR, post-consumer. Why do we rank it fourth? It's not our top priority. It's a huge hype at the moment. PCR is a household word almost. But there are a lot of things we need to observe with that because we can only use very specific sources for cosmetic products. And of course, we can use it as an add-on. It's a great thing to have. But to get really excellent PCR, we have to come back to our design for recycling approach because we need high-quality materials, high-grade materials. Because we have to design our products in a way so as to be able to return them to the recycling loop. And last but not least, bio-based materials. I'm not just talking about sugarcane or corn-based plastic materials because this has been subject to some debate because of food-grade quality materials being used. But we also have paper, we have wood, we have other kinds of materials that we have already been using for our products. So this brings me towards the tubes that I would like to discuss today. Sustainable tubes. Sustainable. Well, everyone asks what is sustainable, and it's not very easy to answer that question, actually. Let me just give you a brief overview of what we've already achieved and of what kind of products we have in our portfolio. I showed you the pyramid. Reduce. We're using tubes with reduced material amounts. We have caps with reduced amounts of material. We have refillable lipsticks, for example. Recycle-ready. What does that mean? This means that the products were designed in a way so as to make them suitable for recycling. What you have here is a compact produced from PP only, or a compact only from PCR. It's a monomaterial. It's perfectly suitable for recycling. And when we're discussing tubes, and I will show you an example of that later, we have developed tubes that are recycle-ready. And we also have virgin fossil-free materials. bio-based solutions, like for example, we offer a paper tube or lipsticks that are wrapped in paper, and also recycled materials. So what we have on the one hand is mechanical recycling. So it's a very classic process. We sort the materials, we shred the materials, and then we convert it into something else. But there is also chemical recycling. Since last year, chemical recycling is being used by our company. It's actually very simple. You take plastic waste, you return it into oil, you reconvert it into oil, and then you use the oil to produce new plastic materials. We also use the mass balance approach. We have the according certificates that we need. For us, it presents an added value, an additional tool that we can use for our PCR approach. Honestly, it's still fairly expensive. It requires a lot of effort, and we really need to thoroughly check our carbon footprint with that method. But we can use it. We can also use it for cosmetic products. So if we develop products, our own innovations, we need to meet at least one of those criteria. But we will never launch a product into the market if it doesn't fulfill at least one of these criteria. So let us see what we've actually done during the last couple of years, because this is not a very quick process. Oh, there we go. There's sustainable packaging. A lot of years of research have to go into that before we can actually offer all those solutions. So let's see what was back in 2008. The wall strength was 500 back then, which is a standard with many companies right now. And the cap here, the Seabell cap, weighed 10 to 11 grams, which is fairly heavy, actually. Our next step was to develop a lightweight cap, which only weighs half of the cap we previously used. Next, we introduced the Greenleaf 1 generation, which is a laminated tube mainly for oral care, where we reduced wall strength compared to regular wall strengths of 300, 350, 500 micron, which was only reduced to 250. In 2010, we first introduced PCR. And honestly, I can tell you, hardly anyone wanted to have that back then. Only very, very few said, okay, let's give it a try. Some actually said, okay, this is our company philosophy, this is what we want to do, but most said it's too expensive, it's not nice enough, we don't want to have it, you have to change it, we need new tests if we want to use that. So we actually offered it, but nobody wanted it basically. And we actually launched it back in 2010, so just think about that. And even back in the day, what we tried to do is reduce our wall strength. And we developed a cap which actually fits that perfectly visually, slim cap. Because it shows the consumer that we use less material while functionality is still the same. It's a flip-top cap. That was our next step to take. Next, there was Greenleaf Generation 2, where we improved our processes for web production. We reduced our carbon footprint in production, and also a different web for cosmetic purposes with only 330 micron reduced wall strength. Again, we improved our production processes. We expanded our PCR range back in 2019. In 2020, I think you read it all somewhere in the media. Metamorphosis tube together with L'Oreal. And it was only available exclusively for L'Oreal until September. And in 2020, I mentioned that earlier, we introduced chemical recycling processes, or we actually introduced using materials from chemical recycling processes. Now in 2021, we have an extruded plastic tube from HDPE with a PE cap, which is Recyclers approved. We have all the certificates from Cyclus and other institutes. And in oral care, we have the first tube, which is completely made from PE, PPL plus a PE cap, which is the first tube that has been produced that way. As you can see, it has been a long way. We've come a long way and we'll continue our research because we are committed to producing more innovations in that regard. So let me now discuss the tube. It looks just like a normal tube. It is a normal tube, actually. But the difference is it has, instead of 500 micron wall strengths, just 350 wall strengths. So in the tube alone, you could reduce material by 30%. So the overall tube was 16% weight reduction, including the cap. And if you compare carbon footprints to a normal tube, it was a 17% reduction. So I guess actually these numbers are quite impressive. Next, this tube comes with PCR too, with PCR Max. This is the tube. So we use the maximum amount of PCR possible for us at the moment, 70% in the tube and 75% in the cap is PCR. So here it just says 64%. So what am I saying here? I said 70%, right? But that's the master batch and the barrier. And after those calculations, so we used our PCR calculator, which is on the point for each individual tube and will tell you exactly how much PCR is exactly in this tube or in the cap or in the entire tube. So let me briefly explain a little about the claims that you find on the packaging, made from 75% or from 100% PCR. Actually, you should ask questions about that and be really careful about what kind of claim you use. You should calculate that very exactly. 100% PCR is not possible because you have to add something. So it will never be 100%. And our 70% that we add, deducting all other components, we get 64%. But that's a real number, the real number you can work with. Again, Spice. Do you know Spice? Are you familiar with that? It's a L'Oreal tool developed together with Quanti. They have an excellent guideline for packaging claims. I really, really recommend that you look that up. There's a new Spice tool for assessing recyclability. Google that. It's very interesting. The Spice guidelines are so valuable, in my opinion, because they offer a guideline not just for tubes, for all kinds of packaging regarding do's and don'ts, what you should and what you shouldn't say, which is very important, actually. PCR has been around for quite a while. It has specific material properties. You have these little inclusions in the material. When it comes to printing on the tube, especially full prints, you have to watch out because it's a little darker than virgin PE. And of course, color variation can be a little more pronounced. But so what? You know, I have recycled material at hand, you know. There will always be something you will have to give up. It can't just be as white as we had it before. It's slightly grayish, beige. There's a slight color difference. That's what you will have to live with. You can use certain prints in order to mask it up a little, but for end consumers, from my point of view, it's not so relevant. Only if you put them in direct comparison, they will be able to notice that in the first place. Low profile cap. This is what we call slim cap. I mentioned that earlier when I showed you the roadmap, our path towards more sustainable packaging. This is the type of cap that weighs about 5.8 grams, if I remember correctly, which is only half of a classic flip-top cap. And it shows the end consumers, because this is a very modern, very trendy design, that we actually saved material producing that cap. And thanks to actually compressing all the material to this slimmer cap, it's very easy to handle, it's very easy to open up. And an added benefit that you should see is, you know, that you're in the shower, you take the tube, you tilt it, and then you have this little sip of cold water coming out of the tube cap. And we solved that because we introduced like a little ring into the cap, so there's a little gap between the shoulder and the cap is closed off completely and no cold water will be able to accumulate in that area. In addition, with the tube, you can also have a sleeve as a seal. And you can also come to our booth if you want to see this little label here. It says PE, so it's an original seal. So this means you can save more materials because you wouldn't need a sleeve at all. So let me show you something that I mentioned earlier about certificates. The two tubes I presented to you, the one with the reduced wall strength without PCR with a PE cap, and the tube with reduced wall strength with PCR Max and a PE cap were certified by Cyclos with a recyclability of 93 to 95%. Honestly, it's the unprinted tube, but the printing would not reduce that rating significantly. Let me briefly ask you, who knows the difference between recycling ready and recyclable? How are they used? Because very often people mix it up. Very often people don't know what that is. Often they say 100% recyclable, which doesn't mean anything, basically. It only means that this packaging can be added to an existing recycling stream. Recyclability actually measures the percentage of the packaging that can actually be recycled. So you really need to differentiate there. What does it mean? So you should really watch out what kind of claims you make, because recyclability can only be confirmed by certain institutes like Cyclos, for example, because they calculate that based on the data. And then you will receive a certificate for that. And the better your tube has been designed with regard to recyclability, the higher the percentage that can actually be recycled in the end will be. And this is something we'll have to do in the future. This is the standard we are held by, because regulations are stricter and stricter. So we will have to provide that kind of evidence, and we will have to provide proof that our products can actually be recycled to a very high degree. And let me just add, out of all the plastic waste produced in Germany, only roughly half is recycled at the moment, because it's not possible in some cases, because we're talking composites, we're talking structures that cannot be sorted and recycled at all. So I think it's very well worth it thinking about how can my packaging be designed in a way so as to make it as recyclable or recycling ready as possible, depending on what you want to say here. Well, actually, this brings us to the end of my presentation. But before I wrap up, I would actually like to tell you a little story now. Very often they're saying, okay, what's your most sustainable tube? There is not the most sustainable tube. There is not the jack of all trades. We'll never find that. We'll never have the magic bullet. We have a lot of solutions that we have to review with the customer background in mind. Something that we need to consider is we have to have a strategy in place in the first place. A strategy for designing our products, because very often we start like from the end, actually. When people say, okay, we want to have something sustainable, we say, okay, what is your strategy? What do you want to achieve? What kind of direction are you headed in the first place? So we have to consider that. We have to look at the product and say, okay, how can we design it in a way so as to make that possible? We can also take small step, reduce wall strength, use another cap, design the product in such a way that we don't need too much finishing. Don't use too many colors. This actually brings you all on the right path. But as I said earlier, you have to come up with your own strategy. And if you don't have a strategy, it's very difficult. So I really would like to recommend, think about what you really want to do. Visit us at our booth. Ask us your questions. We will actually provide plenty of advice to you, and we're happy to support you. So this really brings me to the end of my presentation. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I would like to thank you very much for being here